Welcome to the 20th IA Literati. This is perhaps the largest audience we've ever had. We moved it here to this room. There are a lot of pluses and minuses about moving things, but beware of microphones. Sometimes, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, there, raise your hand. That's good. We at Casa Italia, at the Casa Italia Library, and maybe at any library, our mission is to save our stories. And the Italian-American tradition, the Italian-American identity is at risk of being lost. After, it's been almost 150 years since the highest immigration occurred. People as old as me are the only ones who really remember anything about Italian Americans being a little bit deprived, or maybe a lot deprived, and not well thought of. And our young people are distant from the immigration that took place, and from the story of the immigration, from the time when we were the other. We were, racism didn't just mean that whites were better than blacks. Racism had a whole step ladder as to what race was more superior to another. And Italian immigrants, by the judgment of the scholars of the times up until the 1920s, were considered inferior. And so we have the story, we have the struggle that we should know. The Italian culture is something that is very unique, complex, and enlightening in many ways. And so it's something that we've dedicated ourselves to preserving, and we hope you do too. And again, we have a lot of competition. We've got kids with their heads into iPhones for 4 hours a day, with gambling, with all sorts of other sports activities that occupy our time. There is not, we've got to try to make a little niche for maybe some time to devote to knowing about our ancestors, getting a sense of who we were, to know maybe who we are, and then who we want to be in the future. I have tacked up a couple of the pictures of our artists, our writers who are presenting today. Well, you see on this wall here, these are the people who have donated money to get their picture on the wall. Now, I think our artists deserve it, even if it's just a leaflet for the day, but they deserve it because they are doing a lot to preserve our heritage. And so we celebrate that today, and we welcome all of you. And there are a couple of big news at Casa Italia, the Italian Cultural Center. Not since, I don't know when since, the library will now be open on Saturdays. From 10 to 2, that's Sabato Italiano, that will be celebrated. And all our resources are open to you. If you want to come and take a look at our 300 video DVDs and watch one of those on a Saturday morning, come and do that. Bring your friends. If you want to, and also another revolutionary thing, You can take out books as long as they're not the most precious books that we have. With a $25 down payment membership, you can take out almost any book in your collection. So we're moving ahead, we're reaching out, and we hope that you reach back. And you're the audience that fuels us. So let's get started with the program. Our first presenter is Eric Dregni, and he's no stranger to Casa, Italia, because several years back he helped us to reorganize our kids camp, summer kids camp, and is very crucial to keeping it going at a particularly, I don't want to say particularly difficult time. And so we're very pleased to have Eric with us. Eric has a whole bunch of books on his table back there, but he's going to talk to us about Never Trust a Thin Book. So Eric, welcome to Casa.
Great. Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I realized the last time I was here was when we were trying to help Casa Italia keep that day camp going. And so just to give you a little bit of a background here, I came down from Minneapolis. In the summer, I run the only Italian overnight summer camp in the country, which is called Lago del Bosco. It's up in northern Minnesota. It's super fun. It's crazy. It's a beautiful time. And I thought, okay, when I came here and I went over and I got a little bit of that coffee, super strong coffee, I'm like, oh, this is where I am, right? And good, strong coffee. And I thought, I need to read a section about the book that I wrote about running the summer camp, because it's 18 years. This will be my 18th summer running it. And I think this section is appropriate first thing in the morning, because this is just, I never know, every day is a different emergency, a different crisis at camp. So it's always super fun, but things happen, let's say. Early in the morning at Italian camp, I was awakened by cries of, "Eric, we have an emergency." I scrambled out of bed, assuming that some kid had lopped off his hand or a bear had made a tasty treat of a plump little camper. Would I have to put some severed limbs on ice as we rushed someone an hour to the closest clinic? Zeta, the assistant dean, said grimly, "I don't think we're going to make it." "What?" I panicked. "What happened?" "We're out of coffee." I laughed, but she wasn't kidding about the severity of the situation. The previous director of the camp had purchased a $5,000 espresso machine, a Chimba, and the blissed out staff worked nonstop. Typical of Italian machines from Maseratis to Moto Guzzis, they're unstoppable when they're working well, but they require constant tinkering. I often had to take time away from the campers to adjust the espresso machine for maximum strength and perfect cappuccino. A functioning espresso machine had a direct relationship to the happiness of the staff. Now, with just a week of camp left to go, we had a crisis at Italian camp: no coffee. Although this may seem melodramatic and overblown, I announced the situation at a staff meeting. The counselors emitted a collective gasp, and panic ensued. One of the new counselors admitted that she had slowly upped her dosage each day to at least 8 espressos to keep going. And she said, "Not having any more just isn't going to work. The campers will eat us alive." Michele confessed that he had far surpassed 11 espressos each day. "That can't be good for you," I asked worriedly. "I feel as strong as Hemingway," he replied. 11 coffees in a day is pretty normal, Paola from Brescia said nonchalantly. Tiziana skipped the tiny little Italian demi-tasse cups and just filled a giant 24-ounce Wonder Woman mug with espresso a few times a day. She said, "I was wondering why my stomach was always so upset." Either that or it was the massive amounts of raw garlic Tiziana was ingesting for energy while everyone kept clear of her and her interesting new scent. I asked Luca, the head cook, how we'd reached this point of no coffee. He was not addicted to caffeine, in spite of my best efforts to feed him a double cappuccino every morning and make him one of us. He was not too concerned with the lack of coffee and told the staff to just get over it. He said he had originally ordered plenty of beans to last the entire summer, but the staff had drunk so much that he had to reorder. The distribution center hadn't brought any last time, so he said, we'll just have to wait until next Thursday. That's 2 days away, a dumbfounded lifeguard responded. How are we supposed to survive? I dug through the kitchen pantry and discovered an old bag of coarse ground McGarvey coffee for drip makers. One of the Mr. Coffee makers had already been destroyed when an Italian put milk through the system rather than water to try to make a cappuccino. With only our fancy espresso machine left, I tried using the McGarvey coffee, which strangely lacked any smell or taste whatsoever. Ugh, I'm not drinking that sock juice, Francesco complained and dumped it down the drain. No, Michele put his foot down. You may drink such brown water in America, but I will not at Italian camp. Even the desperate American staff had higher standards now and couldn't stomach this flavorless sewage. With a useless espresso machine, the whole camp was put on hold. We'd reached that crucial point during the summer when the energy and confidence of the campers surpassed that of the staff. Seeing the camp slow slide into squalor after just one day, I heeded the advice of Zeta, the assistant dean. She said, Eric, you need to do something about this now. I hopped into the car and zoomed to town in search of fancy coffee in the north woods of Minnesota. Finally, the third town I visited had a large grocery store and incredibly had passable Italian espresso beans. Salvation was in sight. All right, thanks. And right after that happened, all of a sudden, we got the beans back to camp and the mood completely changed. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background, I'm going to talk now about Never Trust a Thin Cook, which was about my experience living over in Modena for 3 years. So Modena, it's right outside of Bologna. More important, I've learned from the Modenese that Modena is far more important than Bologna. Right? Just like Minneapolis is maybe a little more important than Chicago. That's what we think, right? I went over, I grew up in Minnesota, and then just got tired of the cold and the suburbs and all of that, and wanted to go overseas. So I spent a year as an exchange student over in Brescia, way up in the north. I wanted to go to the south, down to Sicily, or somewhere along the coast, but they put me as close to Switzerland pretty much as you can get. But it was great. I had a beautiful year, and when I went back home to study, my school, McAllister, had no Italian. So I had to go back. I was itching to go back because if you've ever been to Italy, you're trying to go back to Italy now, right? And so St. Paul is the sister city of Modena, and I had a student. I was teaching Italian community ed in St. Paul, and one of my students wrote 175 letters to Italian schools all around Italy, or Italian schools that teach English, and he heard back from 2, one in Padua and one in Modena, 175 letters. And so he went over there, and I went and visited when I was writing about Vespas and Lambretta and stuff. They offered me a job. I came back, and then my wife Katie and I moved over there and spent 3 years there. And I had big dreams. I was going to be this travel writer and do all of this stuff. And then sort of reality set in because, my fantasy of being a highly paid travel writer by writing columns in the local Italian weekly was shattered when I cashed my paycheck of $60, the sum of a month's work. To pay the bills, I convinced myself that going undercover as an English teacher will yield great insight into Italian culture, and I won't have to compromise my literary dream. After all, even James Joyce taught English in Trieste for 11 years while he was writing Ulysses. My first day of teaching, though, I realized the school is no ordinary school. The name of it is Benedict, which sounds very erudite and British, but I couldn't help picture Benedict Arnold, the traitor. The name should have tipped me off. The boss, named Cavaliere Truffino, is able to switch languages with amazing fluidity or at least enough to impress me. He wants me to start immediately, even though I have no formal training in English. Just talk to them and correct their miserable pronunciation, he said. He widens his eyes and declares, go into that classroom with an air of confidence and show them who's boss. I point to him. He replies, grazie. Yes, I am the boss here, but you are the boss of the classroom. He lets me in on a secret skill. Never let students know that you don't know the answer to a question. Smile and nod or change the subject. When I ask him how much teachers get paid, he scrawls some unintelligible little graphs on scratch paper about the pay scale and tells me, you must just work, 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 then you will make money. He proudly holds up his incoherent graph of the pay scale as evidence of how hard I need to work for him. Then I realize he's teaching me another important lesson. When you can't give a straight answer, confuse them. If they ask for clarification, act exasperated until they become embarrassed and finally give up. Cavaliere Truffino sets down his scribbles and tells me that in exchange for him making me rich through teaching, he asks one thing, just one thing. He says, I don't care what you do here. I don't care if you sleep with all your students, that's fine. I know I would. I ask just one thing of you, one very small thing. When you're lying in bed with your students the next morning, just don't say anything bad about the school. That's all I ask. So not an ordinary place, right? So friends back home think Katie and I spend all of our time in Italy sitting around drinking large amounts of espresso and eating pizza. Of course, that is my goal, but sooner or later money runs out and reality sets in. I've learned that I can't afford to work just at the Benedict School because my crazy old boss has decided he has now overpaid all of the teachers since they haven't worked enough hours. Now at the end of the year, he says the teachers owe him money. I put out the word to my friends that I'm available to teach private lessons or to do translations. A fancy Modenese restaurant named Fini hires me to translate the labels on some of their frozen noodles that they sell in the grocery stores. But I explained many of the names of the dishes aren't usually changed into English since the Italian sounds much more exotic. They tell me to do it anyway or they'll find someone else. So I translate sugo alla puttanesca into the horse sauce. Pollo alla cacciatore becomes the chicken hunter, or equally silly, the hunter's chicken. Penne alla arrabbiata changes into angry noodles. And spaghetti alla capricciosa turns into naughty noodles. They're thrilled with the speedy translation. But I tell them teaching is probably more my specialty. After all, giving lessons is just another excuse for me to learn Italian and Italian culture by asking my students questions. Besides, I can use my students as characters in my book about Italy. So I went and I taught all these different classes. Some of them, these adults, some of them I taught in a couple of high schools. And the high school students, they're kind of wild. They were super fun, but we often, as long as I kept them speaking in English and trying to do all that, we had a good time. And so it was easy to get them chatting about different things. So as you may know, okay, so Modena, I nicknamed this Italy's culinary capital, which all of you should be angry about, right? Because any self-respecting Italian will say, no, it's not Modena, it's my hometown, it's the best food in Italy, right? And so when I decided I wanted to go back to Italy, I wanted to go back, because Brescia is great, but it's like polenta, and funghi, and all these certain things up there. And I thought, okay, where do they have the best food, right? So I thought, well, Parma, of course, Parmigiano Reggiano, prosciutto, and all that good stuff. And then I learned about Modena. So Modena not only has that, they also have aceto balsamico, so balsamic vinegar, tortellini, nocino, all these different things. And they have plenty of prosciutto. Plus, they have Maserati and Ferrari right, in town, right? And so one of my students was one of the managers at the Ferrari factory, and then I also got a gig teaching Maseratis right there in town. And so I taught like in their cafeteria over lunch, and they would have this beautiful cafeteria, mensa they call it, and they would be drinking wine and beer at lunch, and then go work on all these heavy machines. So, in Modena, the Ferrari logo is pasted everywhere. Even a computer mouse in the tourist office is colored Ferrari red and has race car driver Michael Schumacher's signature imprinted on it. While in the US, every classroom has the stars and stripes hanging in the corner, Modena's has Ferrari posters. The high school students I teach ask if I root for Ferrari, and I have little choice but to say yes. This puts me in their good graces. Otherwise, why would they pay attention to a traitor? My students ask how powerful my car's engine is back home. And I feel like a fool when I have no idea. Now this is something, okay, how many of you actually know how powerful your car's engine is? 1, 2, 3, okay, we're an Italian group here, okay. But most people have no idea how powerful it is. They say, at least you know the maximum speed of your automobile, no? I explained that US speed limits don't allow us to reach the car's top speed. They don't quite understand. And soon the class breaks into chaos as some students insist Italy has speed limits too. The naysayers point out, no one is ever really ticketed, so essentially there's no law, right? The word safe doesn't really exist in Italian. Sicuro is secure. My students suggest non pericoloso, not dangerous, but add that everything is a certain amount of danger, so safe is a paradox. Later, one of my adult students who works at the Ferrari factory asked me to clarify American product liability laws that allow Porsche to be sued for making a car that accelerates too fast. How is that possible? Troppo veloce? How can a car be too fast? As the futurist Marinetti wrote, speed is beauty. So how can something be too beautiful? Ferrari's Formula One zooms from 0 to 100 miles per hour and back in just seconds. I asked one of my students if these cars are dangerous. He works for one of the many high-tech cottage industries that construct parts for Ferrari's race cars. He scoffs. Soccer is responsible for many more injuries, he assures me. In the last 20 years of Formula Uno, only 5 people have died, and they're usually just spectators. All right, so then I have my last little section. I won't go over too much here. So these students, they're pretty hysterical because they would always have these little quirks, things that they would do because they're very superstitious. The whole idea of malocchio and all that. And maybe you know the idea that instead of knocking on wood, you tocca ferro, you touch iron. Because the students in nearby Bologna, it's the oldest university in Europe, there's the Torre Asinelli. Maybe you've heard there's the 2 towers in Bologna, and they're worried that one of them's going to fall, the little one. But the real tall one, Asinelli, is like asino, so it's like ass, like jackass, donkey. And so the students don't dare climb that tower until they've graduated, right? So there's all these, and then once they graduate, it's sort of a tradition they can go up it. So my students in class, every time they hear an ambulance go by, they don't they're all worried, you know, or they hear even the name of the principal, they're all worried, you know, because it's going to bring bad luck and make them fail their exams. So I learned a lot about superstitions over there, and they thought we're so ridiculous because we don't have the 13th floor in skyscrapers or on airplanes. So that's ridiculous, you know, which it is. So apart from the usual 4-leaf clovers and never opening an umbrella inside, okay, and I learned that there's a twist to that. So, or at least this is what my students told me. If you open an umbrella inside, you don't curse yourself, you curse the oldest person in the room. Okay, and being the teacher, I was the oldest person, so they're constantly threatening me. Okay, and then also, I learned if you break a mirror, okay, 7 years of bad luck. But what you have to do, remember this, is you have to gather every shard of glass, and then you put it in a stream, and it washes all that bad luck away. So I actually had a friend in Milano who broke a mirror, and her nonna comes and she's all worked up about this. So she gets all the shards of glass, and there aren't any streams, of course, in Milano. And so she puts it in the bidet and runs water over it. So many more superstitions are followed, or more appropriately obeyed in Italy. When walking with Italian friends on the street, I noticed little idiosyncrasies, but soon realized many people have a whole series of habits to bring good luck and avoid the bad. With all these pitfalls, it's a wonder anyone even steps out of doors. If you don't wear a scarf when it's the least bit chilly, cold isn't the only disease that will strike. Even the healthiest will surely fall victim to the dreaded colpa di aria or colpa della strega, the witch's hit, and should thank their lucky stars if they survive. Okay, so at our Italian camp in the summer, it's very hot there in the summer, and these Italians will be walking around with a scarf on, or even a light scarf, even in the middle of the summer, because you don't want to get a little bit of wind on your neck, right? Because then you could die, right? And the colpa della strega is it's really bad, and then you get a hunchback. And surprisingly, in Italy, I saw a lot of hunchbacks. And they said, well, okay, if you see a hunchback, you try to touch the hump, and that brings good luck. So they told me in this one town, you have to watch where you walk. Some towns have an arco del cornuto, the cockled arch, that if you walk under, your lover will betray you. When I walk under it, my friends' jaws drop, and they ask, even if you don't believe it, why would you risk it? To undo the damage done, try to squeeze between a couple of carabinieri. These special policemen always walk in twos, reportedly one to read and one to write, since they're notoriously dim. Woe be to you if you walk between two nuns, however, since the holy power of the church will certainly damn you. Otherwise, find a lit cigarette butt someone has thrown on the ground and stamp it out to take all the luck of the smoker. If you miss the cigarette butt and hit dog do, the mitigating factor considered while you're cleaning your shoe is that this is the absolute best sign of good luck. All right, thank you.
Eric has copies of his book back there at the table there, and we encourage you to buy books from our authors today. And if you buy one new book, you are entitled to have one of the books from the used books from the Casa Italia collection. That's in the window wells, the first two window wells. The third window well has picture books and art books. Those are for sale for $5. Okay, so our next writer is Albert DeGenova. Albert has just published this year Human Nature, Poems of Witness, and we're really pleased to welcome Albert back. I don't know how many years ago it was that Albert and a female poet came to Casa Italia, and we videotaped them and their presentations. They were really fantastic. They're so good that we uploaded them to YouTube, and it's been seen dozens and dozens of times by people who've never set foot on the Casa Italia grounds. So we're really happy to know that. And by the way, all of the IA Literati presentations will appear on YouTube in about a week or so. And we try to divide them into the presentations by each individual writer, but sometimes it's not possible technologically by me. Anyhow, we're really happy to welcome Albert DeGenova. He runs After Hours. It's a magazine. It's not a place to drink. But I asked him today if he made a living as a poet. That would be a very unusual thing. That's like bowling a 300 game. He demurred, but he's worth it anyway. I'd give you a stipend of, I think 1.5 million. Albert DeGenova.
Thank you for those kind words. And thank you all for being here. Saturday morning. I mean, that's it's pretty incredible to have this many people out to hear literary readings on a Saturday morning. So thank you all for being here. I'm a poet, so I think I'm the only poet here today. So it's going to be a little different. My new book is called, well, it's written on the top here, but it's called Human Nature: Poems of Witness. And one reviewer described it as kind of baby boomer disillusionment. So that's kind of the theme of the book. And of course, I am Italian American. My maternal grandparents came from Bari, and my paternal grandparents came from Naples. So I grew up in that very Italian environment. Of course, being second generation, it gets less and less over time. But as a poet, I write about my own experiences, my own emotions, and you can't help but that upbringing come into play in some of the poetry. Human Nature, Poems of Witness, there's a number of poems about growing up in Chicago, which we all know is one of the very racist cities in America. And Dominic alluded to it earlier about the way that Italians, when they came here at the beginning of the 20th century, were discriminated against, mostly because they had darker skin. So, and I don't know how many here know some of these little historical facts. Italians were not considered white until after the Second World War. And the largest public lynching in America was of Italians in New Orleans, and that was in the 1890s. So just the other day, I went to a pre-screening of a series that's going to be on Channel 11, and it's called Shame of Chicago, and it talks about how systemic racism was built and actually started in Chicago by the Chicago Realtors Association. Of course, now they've kind of cleansed themselves, and they sponsored this series of, it's a 4-part series that's going to be on Channel 11 about that. But literally, what Chicago Realtors would say was the worst people to live in a building, to the people that will bring down your neighborhoods, are blacks and Southern Italians. So my family was listed at that same list. The uncanny thing was that my family became very racist. And so I'm going to start with a poem that's called Fried Peppers. Italians need not apply. In this country, where the government census couldn't decide what color we were, where New Orleans lynched us historically, where we became cannon fodder in a Second World War. Soon out of the hot Southern Italian sun, we got whiter, assimilating that color like a new language. But at home, my grandparents used old country words, melanzana, or in Chicago Italian slang, tupsoon, words that sounded just like the N-word. Because we weren't digging ditches or pushing bricks in wheelbarrows anymore. We were driving trucks and swinging big Teamster sticks. I heard those words describing neighborhoods where my young grandparents had lived, those once Italian Chicago ghettos. But my mother didn't allow those words, not from her children, not after her own school days would soak through bag lunches of fried pepper and egg sandwiches, not after Wap, Guinea, Dago labels, her revulsion of syntax. A small revolution, recognition, not enough, not yet, so much deeper than skin. We wipe our greasy fingers, one cleansing revolution at a time. And this one, there's a few poems about my father and you. We don't have a great relationship, but you'll hear more of those. Anyway, this is called Brave Pride. We sold our house to a black family. In 1965 in Chicago, when the unwritten rules were clear, we broke the covenant. My father on the run from the bank, He had no more buy now, pay later excuses. I believed my father's swagger, his explanations for sneering neighbors. They were just jealous of his new TV and his big car and my mother's fur coat, his bought-into dreams, discolored and deferred. Another father, scraping a path out of housing projects just 2 blocks away, claimed his piece of a used and tarnished dream, a simple brick bungalow on a 25-foot lot. This brave black family chose to live among Poles, Italians, Irish. On one side, a Cuban family so arrogant they refused to speak. On the other side, a clan of 8 kids, including a boy who ate dirt with a tablespoon in the front yard. Their house so close you could join in their breakfast conversation. And next to them, New World fascists who sent their son out to play dressed in military uniforms. Green was the only color my father saw in front of him, a family with a proud down payment clenched in a strong working man's hand. Broken, we moved into a 2-bedroom basement apartment, heads down on a rainy October afternoon. So, of course, things change. I grew up privileged as, not rich or anything like that, but being white gave me privilege. But I'm also a saxophone player. And as you know, 3 of the most important things growing up Italian were the food and music and family. So my father had been a musician and I became one. So this is called the Privilege Blues. What right, this white boy, to play blues, as if with his shiny saxophone he could know the black of blues? In 1982, alone I listened, waited for my turn to take a place on stage at the Kingston Mines Monday Night Blues Jam. I kept coming back week after week alone, but jamming and sitting in, being invited on gigs. I earned a nickname, Bossa Nova. That was because it rhymed with DeGenova, so they called me Bossa Nova. I earned a nickname, Bossa Nova, but not a spot in the back seat out in the alley on breaks. Not even after Lefty Diz announced to packed house Saturday night applause, now that boy has the blues. Not when I told Big Gary with his vintage King tenor sax, you've got the sound, and he said, but you've got the fire. Especially not after 4 a.m. sore-lip gigs all night on stage, a plastic beer cup at my foot, and breaks of wild turkey shots when I walked haltingly home, alone 5 blocks to my shared bathroom rooming house studio, street lights and long shadows, almost dawn. No cop ever pulls up to check my blue eyes, my saxophone case in hand, to accuse, where you going, boy? Let's watch my time a little bit. Move to this next one. So that's human nature. It's not just about racism, it's just about experiencing life, and it's kind of disappointment at being a baby boomer. Things didn't work out the way we all thought they were going to work out. This book I also brought today, second to newest. This is considered a chapbook, which means it's a shorter book. It's called Mama's Blues, and it kind of traces my mother's decline through Alzheimer's. But, in being a good Italian boy, Mama was special. So it's really, we'll see how I get through these poems. Some of these are difficult to read. But this one is called First Love. You who loved me first gave me words. Now I offer them back. You forget sometimes, so I complete your sentence. You were 19 years old, counting my toes, your firstborn. We've grown up together. I was in the back seat as you learned to drive. With no one on my sidelines, you sent my uncles. Today, at 57, I have friends your age. Time, that elastic measure. So much living between us. Your life, my life. The slant rhymes I've left out. We have an unheard language. No need to read your yellowing journals, the passions you couldn't say out loud. I understand. And maybe our living is enough. You just a few steps ahead, reaching back to take my hand. Look both ways, you say, again and again. you who I loved first to the last word. And this is the title poem. The book is Mama's Blues. This poem is Mama's Blues. They say the blues is a good woman feeling bad, feeling bad. I inherited the blues from my mother. Sitting at the kitchen table, tearing tissue into little crumbs that would never dry a tear, not anymore, not anymore. She sang the blues, about hating him for giving me his name. And maybe this time a hooker would shoot him instead of stealing his Cadillac. The blues was the pink robe she wrapped around her pajamas, making my lunch and searching his pockets for bus fare. The blues followed her into dusty corners, but couldn't be scrubbed away, though she tried. It waited behind the sofa that became her bed, became her narrow bed. Her blues is in me like a nursery rhyme that echoes when I see those sad eyes, all those sad eyes of a good woman feeling bad. Her face, my mother's face, lit by the all-night TV, is the blues, still calling me, still begging me, don't be that name, don't be that name. And this one more out of this book. I'm grateful to Eric for being lighter in his presentation and making people giggle, because there's not a lot of giggles in my poetry. Though I do have a collection that's all love and sex poems, but I didn't bring that today. But that has a little different theme. When I brought my mother into a memory care facility, they had a questionnaire. And this poem begins with an epigraph. It's failing the questions to be answered at Aspired Living of Westmont, Illinois. So I urge everyone to ask, if your parents are still alive, ask them all those questions you never thought to ask. If only on my 50th birthday, and she about to turn 70, we promised no more birthdays. I'd ask back then all the important questions. Her favorite color. I know, I'm pretty sure it's blue. She wore blue so often. And food, tomatoes. Her garden overflowed. August, red heavy on vines. She really likes tomatoes. So thick, her sauce for Sunday dinners. Favorite season? I think is spring. Her birthday is in May. She has always loved Easter lilies. Though I love fall, and we've agreed on so much. Her song with my father was Autumn Leaves. Music? Oh yes, music too. Makes her tap rhythms on her lap as we drive for our pizza dinner. Pavarotti's Neapolitan love songs spinning in her ears. Aren't they? Shouldn't they? When she tells my son, I don't want to make you sad, she knows she can't say his name. When she insists on standing in the door to watch me leave, to wave just as she did when my sons were babies. I believe she has remembered. This is a verb in past tense. How did she learn to dance? The answers are hers, mine, the circumstantial evidence. Like I said, those poems are difficult to read. I'm just going to read two more. And this first one, I said I have a difficult relationship with my father, but this poem was a poem that forgave him. He's still alive, and we talk once in a while. He lives in Arizona. But this poem is called Strong Legs. On your 70th birthday, face to face, standing firm, we shake hands, barely, warm as yesterday's toast. I accepted your excuses then, you always absent from my sidelines, you on your own cross-country run somewhere. Did you ever look over your shoulder? Though you bought me orange bobbers and shiny lures, you never learned to tie a knot or bait a hook. The night crawlers between us stretch for miles. I couldn't forgive your car firebombed in front of our apartment building. The incessant ringing of the black rotary phone, you directing me to answer, say, my daddy isn't home. After a night of scotch and water, you almost bragging about your new car with bullet holes in the fender. The repo man in the alley hiding between garbage cans, state troopers at the door with court summonses. Is your father home? You never were. Forgive? Outside the In Motion ballroom where I was a busboy, your friend signaling to shoot the driver of a car that pulled up next to us. I remember, 2:13 a.m., there was a bank clock across the street. You stood firm. You signaled, no. Who were you protecting? While your car burned, I slept soundly in my warm bed, full belly. You provided in your way. Today is so far from then as I walked up a mountain trail, my son on my back when he, short of breath, cannot go on. As I hiked down the Rio Grande Gorge, never missing a step like a pack mule, carrying my father's belongings. I thank you for these thick, short Italian peasant legs. Today at 44, I am somehow grateful for you not teaching me about these legs, for hiding their strength. Your absence was my teacher. I look across this New Mexican mesa, across an ancient gorge, a horizon wider than the scope of my eyes, a world out of man's scale, standing on your legs. And I'll end with this one. This one has been published several times in different journals and got nominated for prizes and stuff like that. But this is called Family Album. These are pictures of my family. Smell the garlic sauteed in olive oil and poured over blanched escarole greens. The stale air of transatlantic steerage fused with the sweat and bad breath, the rotting teeth of Napolitan poverty. The oily coal smoke that replaced sea air forever, the long train ride, New York to Chicago, one way. These are pictures of my family, fading color slides and plastic sleeves that account for a decade. The 1950s, the fulcrum years when my family teetered between the slum streets of Naples and Southside Chicago unpaved alleys and suburban subdivisions. My grandparents with enough English to play with their grandchildren, my young American parents who never spoke their parents' language to each other. We are the babies. These are pictures of my family, eating and smiling, singing Happy Birthday Day, preserved in plastic just like Grandma's sofa. The sofa that discolored anyway, the streets that were paved, we grew up, those who remembered Ellis Island have been buried. We are no longer guinea dock rats, we are no longer sweating dark-skinned immigrants, we no longer dig the ditches for Chicago's sewers, no longer lay the bricks of the city's skyline. These are pictures of my family. I breathe these pictures into my lungs and smell my grandfather's cigar, his wine press, and the emptied oak barrels. My sons read this family album like a textbook, the dry branches of a family tree, the sterile history of lineage. My sons will never know what an Italian smells like. We are become Americans with Italian names, tossing old country phrases, bocce balls that miss the mark. Thank you.
We'd like to do some more programming with poetry in the future, and in the Italian language as well. Our next presenter is Emilie Lucchese. Emilie has written a book entitled Ugly Prey about the 1920s murder case in which the woman, Isabella Nitti, was sentenced to death. It's a wonderful Italian story, Italian-American story for Chicago, because a female lawyer, Helen Cherese, took up the cause and brought in other Justinians, members of the Italian-American Justinian Society, a lawyers group, to appeal. And Emilie will tell you the rest of the story, but it is it's a fascinating one. Emilie is a writer. She's written hundreds of newspaper articles, and she's got half a dozen books, and she is teaching from time to time and doing lecturing. So we're really happy to present today Emilie Lucchese.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Dominic. It's very nice to be back because when I was writing Ugly Prey, I came to speak with Dominic about my research. So it's great to be back, and I'm very happy to be here. And today I am going to tell you the story of Sabella Nitti. And in 1923, she was sentenced to die for the murder of her missing husband. And there was no evidence, there was no motive. In fact, there wasn't even a positive ID on the decayed corpse fished out of a Berwyn sewer. But prosecutors wanted an easy win. Because at the time, Chicago was seeing a rash of lady killers. And these women were beautiful, and they were feminine, and they would very often charm a jury into thinking they were innocent when they were very guilty. And prosecutors were tired of going to the media and saying, we couldn't get her. In Sabella Nitti, they saw easy, ugly prey. Sabella Nitti was about 44 years old at the time. She belonged to the generation of Italians who kind of had those fluid birthdays. If any of you had a grandparent like that, like, you know, maybe it was 1919, maybe it was 1920. She was one of those. She was about 44 years old in 1923. She was a recent immigrant, and she was originally from Bari, which meant she did not speak the standard Italian dialect, and she didn't speak English, which made communication very difficult, and it made it very difficult to find a translator to help her understand what was happening to her. Now, Sabella's story has become a little bit famous. Nope, I got it. Okay. There we go. Because Sabella was in jail with the women who inspired the play Chicago. And like their you know, the characters in the play are like the real life counterparts in the sense that they were glamorous, they were guilty, and they were not one bit sorry. They inspired this play. You can see here the original at the top, the original play poster, and then on the bottom you can see that right here it became a film. Again, in the 1940s, it was redone with a movie with Ginger Rogers. And if you like Ginger Rogers, you should skip this film. Because it's so annoying. She smacks on gum the whole time, and she calls men daddy, like, just skip it. Of course, the 1970s musical, and then the 2002 movie version of the musical. And throughout, there is a character that represents Sabella, which is the innocent woman who has been framed for a murder she did not commit. And in the musical version, she's portrayed by a Hungarian ballerina who has a very bad end. Fortunately, our story is going to be happier, but what's interesting is I'm picking a Hungarian ballerina who speaks a language and a dialect that is not well understood, but what this story misses is the stigma against Italian Americans in the 1920s that drove the case against Sabella Nitti. As others before had discussed, Italian Americans at the time experienced great prejudice, great stigma. My PhD is in communication. I study stigma communication. And what we see is when there's a bias that's being communicated through the masses, it comes from the top down, right? So you have people like the chief of police at the time accidentally got caught writing a memo that said he would rather hire a monkey than an Italian. And Jane Addams, the famed social worker, in one of my books that sits on my shelf at home is a line in which she says she knows a few good Italians. So Sabella Nitti represented what people felt were these invading Southern Europeans, these invading Italians. And so it was very easy for prosecutors to play to the bias and get a grand jury and then a regular jury to convict her and sentence her to die. So how did this all come about? Let me introduce you to Sheriff Paul Dassa. Anyone related? Good. Because Sheriff Dassa was a deputy sheriff of Cook County, and he was the type of guy, I really go into detail with him in the book, he didn't really go with evidence, motive, he went with his suspicions. And when Francesco Nitti went missing in the summer of July of 1923, this guy had a theory. I'm going to tell you his theory, and then we'll work out the truth, just so you can see how ridiculous it is when a jury convicts Sabella Nitti and sentences her to die. So Dasso here comes up with a theory. Okay. So Sabella Nitti at the time in 1922, when her husband goes missing, is living in Stickney, right by actually where water reclamation is now. So when you drive by and you smell it, you're in the area. That she lived there on what is called a truck garden farm. It was these small farms where they would grow vegetables, and then her husband, Francesco, would take it in the horse and buggy and sell it, actually on Randolph Street, where the warehouse district is now, sell it wholesale to grocers and hotels. Very hard existence, very hard life. So you have Sabella and her husband Francesco. They have two sons in their 20s, one who's about 16, and then two little girls who are 6 and 4. The age differences might seem notable, but Sabella was a white widow, meaning her husband left Italy to come to the US and work, left her behind, and was gone for years at a time. And I think this matters. My own grandmother was actually, or great grandmother was actually a white widow as well. And so this was very familiar to me as to not only why you have a 24-year-old son, and then you don't see anybody for 8 years, but also because it tells you that Sabella and her husband truly don't know each other that well. The summer of 1922, they're living on this farm. Francesco gets into a terrible physical fight with his second son, and he actually leaves for a while. Where does he go? We don't know. But he comes back, and one night, at the end of the night, they send the farmhands home, and he tells Sabella to go up to bed. He says he wants to stay outside. He's worried somebody's going to take a match to the crops. Who is that person? We don't know. What we do know is he never comes up to bed. And around 3 a.m., Sabella wakes up and she walks, remember they don't have transportation, to the local magistrate and says, my husband did come up to bed. He's nowhere to be found. I think he's in danger. And she brings a farmhand with her to translate. And the magistrate doesn't want to deal with it. He sends her to a different, police representative. That guy doesn't want to deal with it either, says we'll deal with it in the morning. Nobody ever sees Francesco Nitti again. Doniso comes up with this theory, and it's rich, so just come with me on it, right? He comes up with a theory that Sabella here is having an affair with her 22-year-old farmhand, Pietro Crudele. And that on the night Francesco goes missing, that Sabella sees him sleeping underneath the buggy, because supposedly it is a hot night, and it's too hot to be indoors, so he's sleeping underneath the buggy, and she gives Peter an axe, or it's like a sledgehammer, and has him hit him once in the head, once in the back. And then they take the horse and buggy, this is a key point, and they drop him in a waterway. Now sometimes the waterway changes, because he's still kind of fleshing these ideas out. Sometimes it's like a water reservoir, sometimes it's a catch basin. But it matters that it's water, because in the spring of 1923, a road crew finds a decayed corpse in a Berlin sewer. And you can see, this is from the Chicago Daily Tribune, not the world's greatest picture, but you can get a sense right here, that sewer, it's just like we would have in the street now. The high top, you take off the grate, and it connects to the grate and the curb. I actually was able to look up the design of the sewer, that was being used at the time to understand, how thick were the pipes, what did they connect to. It was incredibly not fascinating. But there we were, right? And this matters because how did the body get there? Especially if Francesco Nitti was supposedly dropped in a water reservoir. Could it have made it in? No. But this is his theory, and he's sticking to it. It makes no sense at all. And part of the reason it doesn't make sense is the corpse is decayed beyond recognition. There's nothing notable on this corpse, except he's wearing a jacket. If it was so hot and you're sleeping under a wagon, why would you be wearing a jacket and long pants? That's a question to consider. The other thing, and this is crucially important, is that the farm only had one hitch to connect the horse and buggy, and a farmhand had it. So there was actually no way to connect the horse and buggy and take this body to wherever it was supposed to go. This is all fabrication. There's never any testimony that anybody saw an affair. I mean, there's like 8 people living in a 1-bedroom house, right? You would think it would kind of be obvious if they were, having an affair. But this should be the truth, right? The truth is we don't even know if Francesco Nitti's dead. He could have walked away like he had done before. So remember, him and Sabella did not know each other well. He also could have been in a fight with his second son. But a grand jury does not see this because the prosecutors play to the bias. And unfortunately, this bias is amplified by the media. What we see in stigma communication is the creation of the official frame by authorities. Because authorities only are the ones who can frame, right? I can't come up with an idea and put it out there and people agree with me. It's gonna come from our authorities, like I said, Jane Addams, the police, any type of institution that governs us. And then it gets normalized and reiterated in the news media. And we see this particularly by Genevieve Forbes of the Chicago Daily Tribune. She calls Sabella a crouching monkey. She calls her greasy, dirty. And as the trial progresses, she'll make comments like, well, maybe you can kill your husband in Italy, but not here. We have laws. So terrible, terrible bias. Now you would think, does Sabella have an attorney who can, help her fight these charges? No. So she's in Cook County Jail. This is all just happening to her. This is the jail back when it was on Dearborn. She's in the women's block, and she's seen women come to trial and then flirt their way out of it, and she's very keenly aware that this might not work out for her. And it's certainly not going to work out for her because of her attorney involved. She's represented by Eugene Moran. She actually never hired him. He took the case. And he was the son of a famous judge, Thomas Moran. And unfortunately, he did not have his father's legal abilities. But he was also, at the time, suffering greatly from mental illness. And he spent all of the 1930s in an insane asylum in Wisconsin. I know. So he ends up in the trial getting confused, and he ends up, like, at one point, it'd be funny if it wasn't people's lives at stake, like defending the prosecutor from the judge. At one point, he's talking to a witness, and he says he's speaking in Italian, and he's just like adding like O's and A's onto like the end of words, and like basically everything in a vowel, and the judge is just like, this is gibberish, stop. So Sabella Nitti is sentenced to die, along with Pietro Cordelli, and this is the original document in which she's found guilty and she's sentenced to death. She's the first woman in Cook County to be sentenced to die. There had been a woman originally in the 1890s who was sentenced to die, but the judge converted the sentence to life in prison. This did not happen for Sabella, and 90 days separates her from the execution, which they scheduled for Columbus Day, just for that extra day, right? And so one thing that happens is the Justinians get involved. And in the book, I focus primarily on Helen. Her family said Cerise because they were trying to assimilate. So they're trying to say Cerise like the color. She was from Oak Park. I'm from Oak Park, OPRF grads. So I have quite the affinity for her, and I've been able to meet with her family and learn more about her. And I actually have one of her poetry books that they gave me as a gift. And Helen is remarkable because at the time, Italian Americans are not accepted in the legal community. And you see this where you have this remarkable, talented team of attorneys who have experienced great injustice, right? And they've been blocked from the legal community. And very often you'll see one of them will run for a magistrate position or a judgeship, and the Bar Association's recommendation will say capable, good character, not recommended. And I think we know why. They take the case on appeal, and they do so because they realize that this is a ridiculous case. This is about pursuing a woman who can't fight back. It's about pursuing someone in order to have a win. So what they do is they send it down to the Illinois Supreme Court, and they ask for a new trial. And they really have so much to do in this time period. They're getting affidavits, or they're speaking to that farmhand who for the first time is able to say, I had the hitch. There's no way they took that buggy anywhere. They get affidavits in which people say there was never an affair. There is no motive. And in doing so, they send it down and they ask for a new trial. And they're granted a new trial in the spring. So that gives Helen an idea. With the help, Helen is there on the left, and this is Nunzio Bonelli, his wife Margaret. And they come up with an idea, and that is, if beautiful women can't be convicted, let's just make her beautiful. And I think this is such a great idea because Helen is like 23 years old at the time, and she's just so bold. The system has completely rejected her, right? She's beautiful, she's female, she's Italian, no one wants her to be an attorney, so she's nothing to lose. And then she's criticizing the system, at the same time she's playing it. So this is Sabella in the spring of 1924. And so what's amazing is this, look at this makeover. Doesn't she look like she should be mother of the bride at a bridal shower somewhere? And like her biggest worry in life is make sure we wrote down who gave what for the thank you notes. And the thing is, she's really cheerful. She's a good person. I met one of her granddaughters. Her granddaughter said, you know, I feel you really got her right. She was smart because she didn't know how to read or write, but she was learning English. And then she was learning to read and write. She was the prosecutor's worst nightmare. Also, the Illinois Supreme Court said you cannot use your nonsense evidence from the first trial. Begin again. So they begin again, and then these guys happen. Leopold and Loeb. Summer 1924, the trial of the century. These two were University of Chicago graduate students, and they were sons of wealthy businessmen in Chicago and the Kenwood neighborhood, and they killed a 10-year-old boy for the thrill of it. I'm sorry, he was 14. And it was the trial of the century, and the state's attorney, Robert Crowe, was going up against his old nemesis, the famed attorney, Clarence Darrow, and he pulled people off of other trials. So in June of 1924, Sabella is out on bail. There she was with her attorneys, stepping into the sun for the first time. And then in December of that year, the prosecutors had to drop all charges against her because they had nothing on her. And she was a free woman. These are my other books. Ugly Prey came out in 2017. It was recommended by the New York Times. 2019, I had This Is Really War, the incredible true story of Navy nurse POWs in the occupied Philippines. 12 Navy nurses in a concentration camp with civilians. They nursed for more than 3 years. All of them came home. All of them nursed to the end. And then my most recent book is from October of this year. I co-authored a book with a woman who survived Ted Bundy. The Ted Bundy. And it's really interesting even to think of like someone like Ted Bundy. Usually I make the comparison of Sabella against the women who inspired Chicago. Like, why were they so given the benefit of the doubt? And in this one, Ted Bundy was always given the benefit of the doubt. So, very interesting comparison. Thank you so much.
Okay, a question from Anna.
Okay. Anna wanted to ask a question.
What was Peter Pudetta's fate?
Okay, so the fate of the people involved is Sabella, her and Peter divorced right away, right? They were never a thing. She ended up marrying another man from Bari, moved to California, and lived the rest of her life in California, which I hope was a nice one. Peter died young.
Was he exonerated?
He was exonerated as well, and he died about 10 years later. He was kind of like, I ended up being able to connect with a family member, and I found out he left Bari because he got into a fight with his parents. I don't know what about. And he just kind of ended up here, and he died very young. And then of course we know Helen went on to have an amazing career and just to be so impressive. Yes, ma'am?
Did they ever find out? Yes. How
So-
Francesco died?
No, we still don't know. So I've seen some legal scholars, right? Some legal scholars have pointed to his second son. I hold the possibility that he just left because.
Oh, you're saying that wasn't really his body?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't his body. It definitely, I mean, it was so far gone, you couldn't have known, but it was shorter than he was in real life. But we just don't know. We just don't know if it wasn't her.
Thank you. Thank
Okay, well, we're not going to have a break as such before Christmas, before lunch. So if you have to walk out to the bathroom, back to the right. Our next author is an author who participated in Casa Italia Library's effort to publish books ourselves. We publish on Amazon, and we published almost 20 books, and you can see that in the flyer that was on your seat. We invited Jeff Gentile, who's a graduate of Loyola's dental program, to write the history of the Arcolian Society. And this is part of our effort to capture the story of Italian-American organizations. And we also have with us the person who Jeff Gentile is the one who wrote the book. And then we had C.J. Martello. Some of you might know C.J. is the columnist for Petals from Roseland in the Franois. And they two worked together, and they got the thing in publishable form and sent it off to Amazon. Amazon has printed it, and it's had wonderful reception among the members of the Arcolian Society. And it is a model. If any of you out there have a book that you'd like to publish, that you're not interested in making any money on, please get in touch with us, and we'll try and help you get it published on Amazon. So our next presenters are Jeff Gentile, the author, and C.J. Martello, the editor.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here with all these other authors, so I feel very honored. So the first thing I want to say is, with this group, I feel very fortunate because while I was working on my book, the volunteers here at Casa Italia let me spend Wednesday afternoons here, and what I witnessed then is all the hard work that these volunteers do to preserve our wonderful heritage. So it's very important. In a world in which, let me get the initials right, AI is trying to threaten and eliminate people and ideas, IA, Literati, is preserving people and ideas. Very important. So it's behind the scenes, no one's making any money, but they're doing this great work. So I witnessed that. So here's a little story. I'm a third year in dental school at Loyola, and we're finishing up on the clinic floor. And one of our instructors, Dr. Chuck DeFranco, who's no longer with us, was grading our work, me and a couple other students, and he says, "What are you guys doing tonight?" "Nothing, it's a Tuesday night." And he goes, "You're coming to an Arcolian meeting." And I quote, I said, "What the hell's an Arcolian meeting?" He goes, "Just come, you'll have a lot of fun, and you'll have a great time." So we went. Long story short, we had a great time. I was a student. I signed up that night as a student, never looked back. It's been 40 years. So that's my quick story. Now I'm the historian for the Arcolian Dental Art Society, which is the Italian-American Dentist of Chicago, established in 1931. So The Arcolian name comes from a man named Giovanni di Arcoli, who, in the 1400s in northern Italy, was a professor, surgeon, and an author. Back in that time, dentistry wasn't an actual field, so all the medical surgeons dabbled in dentistry. He invented dental instruments, dental filling materials, and he published guidelines for preventive dental care. So that's where the name comes from. We have very entertaining meetings. We have lectures, we have prayers, and a lot of jokes. And the most important thing is we eat and drink better than any other professional group because of all the food. And we have a lot of homemade goodies there too. Every year we have a raffle and a golf outing. We raise money for our many donations that we give out at our annual Christmas party. That's kind of what we're all about. I'm going to read you a short paragraph in the foreword, which I think really sums up what the Arcolians are all about. The accomplishments of this dental group are multifold. Yes, they have provided excellent patient care throughout the years in their offices, but the differences they have made in people's lives outside the office because of their donations and what they believe in socially and professionally is rather impressive. And this is important. We take none of our success for granted, knowing very well that our first generation ancestors sacrificed and paved the way so we might have a better future. That's so important in the Italian tradition. We know that those first, the first generation people came here and sacrificed so second and third could have a better life. Very important. So in light of that, we simply make it our goal to share our good fortune with others, celebrate our Italian heritage, and nourish our friendships in the process. That's kind of what we're all about. So basically what I did over the years, I've collected all this information, photos, documents, and I put it into a story form. That's basically what the book's all about. I wrote it from the heart. This is how it turned out. This is what it looks like. And Dominic and CJ gave me ideas for the size and all that, so that's how it turned out. So I'm very proud of it. I'm glad for all their help. So at this point, I always like to thank people. Oh, and by the way, all the proceeds go to charity, so covered. I like to thank people who helped me along the way. There's many, but there's a few that are here today. The first person I'd like to thank is Dominic, because Dominic is the one who inspired me to write the book. So Dominic, it's a treat. My initial editor, Joan Fitzsimmons, is here. My wife, Eileen, who's back there also. Eileen, see, I'm a paper guy. Everything goes on paper. The table was filled with papers, so I'm just not a techie. But my wife, Eileen, helped me bring digital life to my handwritten pages. She also handcrafted and designed homemade bookmarks, which are classic. So, these bodies. And she also spent the last 2 days working in the kitchen for our pastry challenge. They're in the little bags up here. You'll get those in a few minutes. So, did you give one to me? Good. And I can't say enough about CJ Martello. CJ spent hours upon hours helping me with editing, publishing, and cover design. So I'm going to have CJ come up and say a couple words, and then we're going to have some fun with some gifts in the pastry challenge.
So I am a columnist for the Franoi, Chicago Italian American News Magazine. I've been writing titles from Roseland for the last 16 years. And my first 10 years I produced a book. And so I'm about to work on my second book. It's called Roseland Recollections. And that's one of the ways I got associated with Casa Italia, because of Literati. But actually, my history with Casa Italia goes back to 1961. You are now sitting in my dormitory. I was a seminarian here after 8th grade in 1961. And in 95 degrees, sweltering heat with no air conditioning, we were expected to sleep. And it didn't matter that we couldn't sleep, we had to get up early the next morning to go to Mass. So I've got a lot of history here. I seem to be going backwards in time because I lived on the north side for 40 years. Then I got hooked into writing the Tales from Roseland column for the Franoi. And so where do I live now? Back in Pullman, where I grew up. And I go back to St. Anthony's Church. So I'm going backwards in time instead of forward. But my association with Casa Italia, as I say, started with Literati, but I volunteered here many years ago. I came back to volunteering here. And because of my expertise in writing and working with computers, I was asked to become the book editor here. And so I'm the consulting editor for our Kindle, Amazon Kindle books. And what we do is we produce books using the Kindle, Amazon, which Kindle is their publishing arm. And it's print on demand. So you do your book, and we go ahead and help you put it together. We edit it. And one of the things, when Jeff came to me with his book, you know, it's not really something I have to try to work on, you know, a book about dentists, you know. And I'm like, okay, let's see what we got here. What we have here is a treasure. Because what my friend Jeff did, besides introducing my cousin Chuck Martello here, what he did was put together a great history. He researched the entire history of the Arcolian society and went back and found that they hadn't even had records to maintain the history. So he created the history from what he found. He went researched it, talked to all these different dentists, and together he and Eileen put the book together. And it's so funny because just now as I was asking Jeff about what he's going to be doing up here, he pulls up his nice little folder with his handwritten what he's going to do. And I'm like, oh, that means Eileen did all the work in putting this book together on a computer. Yep, that's my buddy Chuck. So we became good friends working on this book. And it was interesting because it's the second book I worked on. And the fact is that he had pretty much put everything together in great form. He and Eileen did a great job of putting it together. And then we had a discussion about the different things that go into producing the book. And let me see here what I have here. So the whole thing was, from the beginning, was creating the book, and you choose what size you want for your book. You could have a book of this size, right? Or you could have the book that's full size, 8.5 by 11. And then also along the way you choose whether you want color photographs or black and white. And so putting it together, from my end, it's what does the author want? What specifics would the author like to present? And we keep that in mind when we put the books together here at Casa Italia. With Jeff, he had plenty of photos. He was very proud of the photos he's taken. As he said, he's been associated with Arcolian for 40 years. He had plenty of pictures of their events and the family pictures and their outing pictures. And one of the things he insisted upon was we put in logos from the organizations they donate to, because they're Arcolians, they're a philanthropic organization. We covered that. Should the book be in color or in black and white? And online the difference was $2 more, $3 more to go with color. So I went with color. And I said the book size, I like the table size, so like in the waiting room of the dentist's office, you can find a size book that's easy to see and easy to handle. And then also our editing process. So as I say, Jeff brought in paper. We worked over it. I edited it, went through it, edited it in my style, gave it back to him. He looked at it, added things to it, you know. We went back and forth numerous times to come up with a proper book. So if you have a book you want to publish through Casa, Italia, it's published online, it's on demand, so it's not like it's sitting on the bookshelf somewhere for people to buy. You don't have to worry about any of that. But when it comes to editing, it's a co-worked, it's a coordinated effort, I should say. It's a coordinated effort to print what you want as an author, and my job is to see that it gets said in a clear way that people will understand. And so you don't have to worry about any of that. Spelling, you don't have to worry about any of that. That's my job. And then so it's basically a continuous process of editing, and that's what we did. And then you submit the copies to Kindle, and they will tell you